Hi, this is Lindsay Oden, Special Research Assistant at the Washington State Attorney General's Office, and this is your AGO Moment in History. In this series, our office will be releasing clips from our Oral History Project, an ongoing effort to collect and preserve the history of the Attorney General's office as told by the people who have worked here over the years. In this episode, our current Attorney General Bob Ferguson interviews former Attorney General and U.S. Senator Slade Gorton. Senator Gorton served 3 terms as Attorney General of Washington State from 1969 to 1981. He was later elected to the U.S. Senate, where he served 3 terms from 1981 to 1987 and from 1989 to 2001. In this clip, Senator Gorton addresses some of his biggest challenges during his tenure as Attorney General. Senator Gorton first discusses the lawsuit against former Attorney General John O'Connell, who was accused of taking financial kickbacks during his time in office. Senator Gorton then discusses the scandal that broke during the 1972 election season. His deputy, J. Keith Dysart, launched an investigation of Democrat Albert Rossellini, a former governor of Washington State who was once again running for governor against Senator Gorton's close friend and ally, Republican Dan Evans. Lastly, Senator Gorton discusses his struggles with Governor Dixie Lee Ray, who attempted to drastically reduce the size of the Attorney General's office by reassigning most of its attorneys to the governor's office. Let's listen in to how Senator Gorton handled these challenges during his time in the Attorney General's office.
There was actually a lawsuit. I found this fascinating. A lawsuit from the AG's office against your predecessor, John O'Connell, which, I find no end fascinating. And John Hughes touches on that in some detail. But maybe for the viewers, perhaps you could briefly summarize what that was about. Then I'm just kind of curious, more than about the details of the case. Although I'm interested in that as well. I'm sort of curious, just the thought process of that. It must have been so unusual for an attorney general suing a predecessor. I'd be curious to pick your brain on that.
The world was very different in the late 1960s and the early 1970s. And I mentioned earlier that I inherited, a couple of major antitrust lawsuits from John O'Connell. John O'Connell invariably farmed out big cases like that to private law firms. And one of those firms he farmed out to a San Francisco lawyer named Alioto, I think, as I remember it, and had a secret kickback arrangement with him.
Substantial.
With a certain significant amount of money would be paid to O'Connell for his individual participation in it. It was shocking to learn about that.
Yeah.
And my memory is that none of these deputies or assistants knew that it took place. That's what the lawsuit was about. And one of the 2 greatest disappointments I ever had in the Attorney General's office was that even though we had an outstanding Seattle lawyer representing us in a lawsuit that took place in Vancouver, we lost it. Now that wouldn't happen today.
Well, was there a change in state law afterwards so that I can't profit from a consumer protection action? Or I think that might have happened afterwards, yeah.
Now, I think the highest salary John O'Connell ever had as Attorney General was about $16,000 a year.
Yes.
You could see from a personal point of view why he wanted to earn extra money, but it was, in my view, totally, utterly, absolutely inexcusable.
So I guess I was so fascinated by that case, right? I guess I was just curious about, again, less the details, but more, was it a difficult decision to sue him? I mean, you must have realized that's going to get a lot of attention and get all sorts of publicity, and people be accusing you of going after a predecessor of a different party.
It was a little bit difficult, but it was so blatant.
Yes.
I think it was probably more difficult for those deputies of mine who had worked for him and had been close to him
that's true.
and knew nothing about it. It was devastating to them, because they'd been close personally. I'd never been close personally to John O'Connell. I didn't like having to do something like that, but it was a hard decision only because it was the Attorney General. It wasn't a hard decision on what we viewed as being right and wrong.
Right. You mentioned when you were answering that question it was one of your 2 greatest disappointments. So I don't know if I've ever interviewed anyone in my life, Senator, but I know enough to ask if someone says it's one of 2 disappointments. I've got to ask what the other disappointment is. So as long as you brought it up, yeah.
But it's in the book, and you've read about it. When my first chief deputy left, I hired a young man as my chief deputy whom I liked, and who was very political. And my first re-election campaign came around in 1972, and I told him I'm going to be gone from the office campaigning most of the time, and you're in charge of the office, and you are not to involve yourself in the campaign at all. And I guess technically he abided by the instruction. He didn't involve himself in my campaign, but he did involve himself in the governor's campaign.
Right.
And he involved himself in it by trying to prove that Governor Rosalini, who was running to try to come back in, was a crook and had taken money from various people. Again, I guess in today's world, we could probably have gone to an investigation like that without being criticized. But it was very dubious at the time, and I knew nothing about it until I got a television camera thrust into my face, asked by King TV, by their investigating reporter about it, to which my answer is, huh? And King never believed my denials, and there's someone in that book who never did either.
Yes.
But it was an awful 2 or 3 weeks before that election to have one's integrity questioned over something he absolutely knew nothing about. So that deputy was gone. It was traumatic enough so there was never a chief deputy after that. There were just equal deputies.
So how did...
But it did not affect the election.
Interesting. And I think you mentioned in your book what a difficult time that was for you in your life, that whole election period time. And so just as an elected official, you're in the public eye, you have TV cameras thrust in your face when something happens. In this case, sounds like beyond your control, in the sense someone's out there doing something outside your instructions. I guess this is maybe more of a personal question, but how do you handle that just on a personal level, right? Not professionally, right? I mean, you've got to run your office, but you've got a wife, you've got kids, you've got a family. How did you feel going through a period like that, just on the personal side? How'd that go?
It was about as miserable a 2-week period as I've ever spent, and I know that it was for my family as well. I also learned something much later, well into my Senate time. My older daughter, straight out of college, I got a job on the weekly newspaper in Oak Harbor.
Okay.
And of course, because she was from a political family, she interviewed the candidates who would come through Oak Harbor, the standard weekly newspaper interview. And the week before the election, she got to write a column. And she wrote a column on the difference between just reporting politics and being in it.
No kidding.
And wondering whether or not you would have to find a new home after every single election and would miss all of your friends and the like.
No kidding.
And gave both Sally and me an insight into what it's like for kids that had not really occurred to us previously.
That's fascinating. I've got young children, as you know, and so they're still pretty young, and but as they get older, they're growing up obviously with me in this role, and my wife and I do kind of wonder, well, how does that form them in what way, and what's their reaction? In fact, speaking, I think it might have been your thought.
It will affect them much more than they will tell you.
Yeah, it's probably a good thought, actually. And now, Senator, there's a lot in your 12 years that we don't have time to get to all of it, but I do just want to say, is there anything else that we didn't touch on that you really, this is, of course, going to be closely watched by folks in the office. I just want to open up anything else you want to...
That crosses party lines. The greatest threat the Attorney General's office ever had was from Dixie Lee Ray. I served my first 2 terms under Dan Evans, and we were just very close on everything. And then Dixie Lee Ray was elected governor, and there were 3 kinds of people Dixie Lee Ray detested: lawyers, Republicans, and friends of Dan Evans.
You were the trifecta.
And I was the trifecta. And so one of her first bills was to take 90% of the office away from the Attorney General and give them to the governor, all of the effectively solicitors, the representatives of the various state agencies.
In other words, just so the viewers are, so the attorneys who, of course, at the time, since the 1940s, reported to the AG would now
report to the governor.
Would work under the governor and the client agencies.
And she had a substantial Democratic majority in both houses of the legislature.
And sponsors of her legislation as well, who are prominent legislators.
But my savior was Martin Durkin, father of our recent United States attorney. And as I reconstructed it afterwards, hazily, there was a time while I was in the legislature, very likely when I was majority leader and was really sort of running things, when Martin Durkin had a personal favor, had a bill or something in the legislature that he wanted that Republicans in the Senate had been against, and he came over and asked me to do him a favor. Mm-hmm. And I said yes, and I did it. I have no idea what it was at this time, but I did it. And you cast your bread upon the waters, and it comes back 100-fold. Mm-hmm. I called him and said, could he help me on this? And he said, it's dead.
Interesting.
And he killed it, deader than a doornail.
Interesting. And that would have fundamentally changed our office, of course, in a
would have made us just
absolutely. And my recollection is, it might be in my notes here, that there was, at a subsequent time, maybe in the 80s, there was a similar piece of legislation that was proposed. I think it seems from time to time that those efforts come back. And my recollection, yes, is in 2010 actually, which I think you wrote, you might have written about in op-ed about, I think is in the Olympian. I don't have that in front of me here, but I seem to recall reading a story about that. So this does seem to come back every 25 years or so.
Well, you're free for a while.
hopefully I'm gonna dodge it. But I guess it was the, and I did have some notes on this to ask you a little bit about it, so I'm glad you brought it up. So was that driven back in the 70s really primarily or exclusively by Governor Dixie Lee Ray?
Yes, it was absolutely her deal.
I see.
Yeah. There was no great demand for it. I may even have overestimated its dangers when it came up, because that did not come from the legislature itself.
I see. That came from the governor.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
Thanks for listening to this AGO moment in history. Be sure to like and subscribe to receive updates when we upload a new episode. On our next episode, Senator Gorton discusses the substantial changes to the Attorney General's office during his tenure. Thanks, and talk to you again soon.